Hello, everybody. It is the return, once again, of EDHTakes. Apologies on waiting so long into the year to get this first episode out. I'm Elijah Samuelson, joined here by my good friend Spencer Cook, and we have something really big to talk about today. It finally happened. Last Tuesday, February 11th, Gavin Verhey finally unveiled the bracket system for Commander power, not necessarily power matchmaking, but like game matchmaking, which people have been looking forward to for a long time. This was alluded to, I think, in the post absolution of the rules committee. You know, when WotC took over, they were talking about doing this quote kind of objective like ranking system.
Yep.
And it had been a long time. We thought it would never come.
Exactly.
But we should have expected that it would come on a random Tuesday. I mean, Gavin knew that's our Commander night, so
yeah,
good timing on that.
And they had to know you would have been sick when they dropped it too, so you couldn't.
Yeah, we would have done some stuff earlier in the year, but apologies, listeners. I was actually physically ill for like 3 weeks straight. I kind of had like a monkey's paw moment. I wish going in the new year, I'm like, I would like to lose 10 pounds. And so the universe was like, how would you like to have the stomach flu followed by 2 weeks of bronchitis? And I could not eat. So,
before the bracket system was announced, they were working on another Commander project. Do you remember what that was earlier this year?
You're talking about the Silver Border project?
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. I'm glad that they
we got this one first.
I'm glad they shelved that for a little bit to work on something more important, in my opinion.
Yeah, this is a big deal. This actually feels like not quite as big as the Commander bannings and the destruction of the rules.
Relegation.
When Gavin cooed the Commander Rules Committee and he said, "I'm taking charge now." But this is
this joking?
Like I said, I'd lost my appetite, but I've got a large appetite over the last 2 weeks or so, or however long it's been now, 11 days, for some discourse.
Oh, of course.
And there's been plenty of it. We've got like a 7-page document here. We've been talking about this for over a week, like since it came out. We've listened to like 4 or 5 different podcasts. We've done our homework on this one, I'd like to think.
Oh yeah, I've read Reddit, so that means I know everything about this.
I've read at least 5 r/EDH posts of varying degrees of... Yeah, probably the most knowledgeable people in the entire Commander community.
Yeah.
Our greatest minds are there. That's notably where we got the previous power system, which I think they might say is still much better than this one. I mean, that had 10 levels. This one only has 5. Bigger number.
About half as good, right?
Yeah, so Gavin, he's trying, but, there's still room for improvement. This is still kind of in the beta phase, as he will say. But what even is the bracket system? What are we even talking about here? So the bracket system is 5 brackets that we have now for less of a... Well, this is a confusing distinction. It's kind of a power level system, but within the individual brackets, it's more of a experience rating, kind of what kind of game you're looking for.
I've heard it described sometimes as a matchmaking system, like a way to find games. But yeah, I definitely think I would definitely call it like the experience. Like I think that's the most important word to think of. More than, I mean, of course, power is going to be intertwined with that, right? Because obviously, very low power versus very high power, different experience of a game, right?
Yeah, like the average 2 deck on the bracket system will be stronger than bracket 1. Bracket 5 is stronger than everything.
Yeah.
That sort of deal. But within like bracket 3, like you could have a pretty wide range of power. You want to just go through here, Spencer, and read off like kind of the brief descriptions from like the infographic in the article.
So yeah, let's just talk about what the brackets actually are. So this is like you said, Eli, this is a system with 5 different brackets from 1 to 5. 1 is described as exhibition, and it's kind of described as ultra casual commander. So generally what we're talking about is usually very themed decks. So some of the examples that I think Gavin gave were like all 4 CMC cards, or all horses. I think
this will be the cup tribals.
Your cup tribal, your classic
your homelands deck,
your women looking to the left, that kind of deck. Do you want to talk about the specific like the distinctions that let's talk about the
that. Quote close to objective rules for these things for the brackets. Within each bracket, there's a few
restrictions.
Yeah, restrictions for what you likely should not be doing. In bracket 1 exhibition, no MLD, which in this case the language MLD typically we would say mass land destruction. This has been reworked, and maybe this is something people were doing before, but I feel like this is more of a Gavin thing, which I like. Mass land denial, meaning either the mass land destruction cards or things like Blood Moon that restrict your ability to access and use mana.
A card like maybe stasis or whatever. Don't untap
like
your
a stasis
lands.
Or like a Winter Orb, stuff like that. No extra turns in bracket 1. No 2-card infinites. And no game changers and few tutors. Game changer, we're going to talk about that later. That's a list of powerful cards that can noticeably impact the power level of a deck.
Yeah. So like we were saying, another key thing about bracket 1 exhibition is generally on a power level system. It would say pretty much worse than the average precon, I would say. And that brings us into the second tier, bracket 2, which is known as core, which has been described as the average precon, the average modern precon, I think, technically, if we want to be clear. So we're not talking about like 2013 precons, like the Kali of the Vast deck that has one piece of card advantage in the entire deck,
I think those are probably a solid 1.
Yeah.
1.5.
It has some of the... So this tier has some of the same distinctions as Tier 1 with no mass land denial. Instead of no extra turns, it has no
chaining extra turns. So no, I time warp and then I time stretch.
Yeah, so you're not playing your Narset deck that's trying to chain extra turns. And I think actually real quick before I finish that off, like I said, I think intent is really important in these distinctions. So it's, especially in, I think something they talk about in Commander, it's possible that synergy between cards you have and other people have could cause, chain extra turns or could cause lands to be destroyed. But I think the important part about this they've discussed is the intent. So you're not trying to chain extra turns. You're not putting cards that will do that in your deck.
Yeah, like you could accidentally maybe build a bracket 2 deck that has like a single time stream navigator in it and like a way to tutor out a pirate from your deck and like link that and then like give it haste. That's you probably didn't intend to do an infinite combo with that, but it's possible.
Yep. And on that subject, a bracket 2 deck will also have few tutors like bracket 1, no game changers, and no 2-card infinites.
Yeah. And so like you said, it's the average pre-constructed commander deck is kind of the point of reference for how strong these decks would be, but it's not necessarily the case that they should be no stronger than a precon, just roughly like fitting the game experience of what you would expect in like a game amongst precons.
And I think that's pretty core, no pun intended, because it's the core the bracket, but that's pretty core to what I think the idea is. It's not literally precon like power level, it's the experience of a precon. So what that might mean is WotC wouldn't maybe design a commander deck or a precon to have like a Teferi knowledge pool. I mean, I know that's literally a 2-card combo and that can't be in this category, but if you can imagine other strong, super strong synergies or like maybe broken interactions may or may not be part of a precon experience. I mean, that's just, it's a little bit vague, but that's kind of the idea.
Depending on the cards that you choose, I would say an upgraded precon, like a switch out 10 cards, better than a precon, still probably fits bracket 2. Like,
absolutely.
I have a friend with the Will Helt, the Rot Cleaver Zombies commander precon, which is a good precon, good commander, switched out 10 cards. makes it a lot better to take out the garbage cards from the pre-con.
Yeah.
Probably still a 2, I would say.
Yep. So moving on to the next tier 3, which is it's the upgraded tier, so that would imply like upgraded pre-con, but I think you have to kind of go a decent bit above that, like pretty far.
I think this is where you get to decks that are made from scratch, like in a super purposeful way of like, I'm looking up things on Scryfall, EDHREC, and then like I'm maybe even using like a deck building template.
Yep.
I have like some experience, like I'm building with like high synergy. I am including some noticeably powerful cards that like maybe you wouldn't see in the average precon, or would be very unlikely to see in the average precon.
Yeah, in larger quantities, you might also be playing some of the best versions of some cards, or at least some of the better versions of an effect. So, but not necessarily playing the most optimized, streamlined deck you could, but probably, I think, Eli, that the bracket 3 is where a lot of the games that we play probably would fit, but
I think this is where the majority of commander decks are going to fit into, personally, and we'll talk about that more later. But the deck restrictions for this, again, no MLD, no chaining extra turns. This allows for late 2-card infinites, meaning around, like, I believe in the article Gavin says around like turn 6, but in my experience, I think this is the range where you get into those commander games where like around turn 7 you expect that somebody's either going to try and win or start killing people, and that's a pretty reasonable, and that might sound pretty early to some people, but it's actually like not that crazy.
Yeah, it's like maybe it's your turn 7, you've got a couple mana rocks in play, you've established like a pretty large, maybe there wasn't a board wipe, so you've established a large board, you're playing, your finisher, and you're attacking someone for a lot of damage, or you have this crazy synergy where you're making a bunch of guys or something, right? Like, it's that kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. And maybe you have, so yeah, like you said, you like 2-card infinites maybe in the late game, probably not ones that you could assemble very early on in the game. That's kind of for later. And then also up to 3, so between 0 and 3 of cards from the Game Changers list. Also, before we talk about the Game Changers, I do also, this isn't specifically stated anywhere, but I think, in my perception, I think this is the kind of tier, the bracket 3, where you might start to think that a deck might have some ways to be like pretty explosive. So they might have a way to like play like a mana geyser and come out of nowhere, or have like other cards I think of explosive, like reanimate and black. I'm not saying you can't play those cards in a lower bracket deck. It's just at tier 3 I'm expecting decks to be able to maybe do a lot in a turn, I guess, right, from nothing potentially.
Yeah, like we said, talking about the pre-con experience.
Yeah.
When I think about the pre-con experience, it's not that like the cards are necessarily that bad, but you're maybe running out 1 to 2, if you're lucky, like haymaker type cards per turn.
Yep.
Whereas bracket 3, you're probably getting into those turns, like you said, where you go mana geyser and I play this and this, and like I do this and I untap these things and then I do this again.
Yeah.
And then I draw a bunch of cards. Like, you're doing those explosive things.
And you might not be winning, but you're probably setting up something pretty strong, right? Or you're having like you said, that storm off turn, not literally storming off, but like doing a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And not to say you can't do that in bracket 2. I'm sure with a big setup board of synergy, you might be able to do that, but it's much more common, I think. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Going into bracket 4, this might actually be the most controversial bracket, and we'll talk more about that later. It would be high-powered commander. It's time to go wild. No restrictions aside from the ban list. So we used to play in a few groups that I would consider to be the high-powered commander. Like, you're like, there's no real rule. Like, people are like, with some exceptions, maybe. We maybe had some like personal like house like ban lists that we played around, but like, you expect to see really strong cards. Nobody's feeling bad about combos. You take the extra turns as much as you can. Like, you just expect to see it. Free counter spells. Like, there's no cards that people are going to see as long as you're trying to win the game. And I want to maybe move into and talk about at the same time bracket 5 being CEDH, and I think most people listening to this probably have a pretty good idea of what CEDH is. And following the deck building restrictions, 4 and 5 are the same. So people have been talking about this, and aside from the deck building restrictions, what really differentiates the brackets, and especially here 4 and 5, what would you say is the big difference in your mind, Spencer, between high-powered commander and CEDH?
Yeah, the way that it's described by Gavin and the other people, and the way that I see it, is it's the mindset and the meta consideration. Like, from a CEDH perspective, you're really considering yourself playing in an established meta, and not just like a personal meta necessarily, but like a overall competitive meta. So there's really no consideration of feel bads, right? Like, that's not a thing. You're playing it from a strictly competitive standpoint. Not to say you're not having fun, but like, you know, it would not be a problem if you just made someone discard their hand or something. Like, that wouldn't be like a super feel bad. Like, they might not be great about it, but it would be expected. So that it's really from the mindset of the people going into the game, I think.
I also think that there's certain commanders or deck archetypes that just could not possibly fly in a CEDH environment. And I think Gavin maybe mentioned this in the EDHTakes podcast, where maybe they talk about this in the Command Zone episode too, where there's just like certain commanders. Like, for example, I have a Queen Marchesa deck, which is Mardu. It wins with life-swapping cards and near-death experience.
Yeah.
And it plays a lot of very powerful cards in it. And maybe if I put in like some more like fast mana and tutors, I think I can make a pretty good argument for that being a bracket 4. Because it's just doing a thing that like doesn't really fit. It's like hard control aside from its main win condition. It's card advantage, board wipes, a lot of broken removal, spells, board wipes, removal.
Fastish mana.
It's probably not very fun to play against, and probably doesn't fit with a lot of bracket 3 decks. But the win condition is, like Rachel described on the Command Zone episode, she has this Feldegriff deck that is a combo deck, and it wins with some very powerful cards. But the thing that it's trying to do is just not something that could possibly cut it and be up to snuff in CEDH.
Well, because there would just be better things to do for that strategy, right? If you're making infinite mana, there would be a better thing for you to do than to be doing the Feldegriff combo.
And it's my opinion and understanding of CEDH that the thing to do in CEDH is always just the best, whatever the best thing to do is. Like,
or at least that's the attempt, right?
It should be, because you're trying to win.
Yeah.
Like the end goal is like it's not. You're not thinking about like, oh, like because I think in high power you're also thinking like, oh, I want to win, but you're also thinking I want to express myself and like still be creative and like kind of play close to that original feeling of Commander, like doing like some flashy, like maybe you're even like still like winning with like combat damage in bracket 4,
or you might be restricting to yourself to a specific strategy. I think maybe most strategies probably could be built up to a power level of high-powered bracket 4, but you probably not to a CDH level, because you would just be using a strategy that is almost inherently worse than some other things you could be doing. So I think maybe this isn't right, but I think most commanders could probably be built up to a bracket 4, maybe not to CDH level, right? So,
like in bracket 4, I'm thinking of this like play pattern of maybe in a very aggressive. I think I have a deck that's like technically capable of this, but like I played somebody else's deck one time where it went like turn 2 Dark Ritual Treasonous Ogre, pay 18 life to get out Fiery Emancipation.
Yeah.
Turn 3 play Bruce Tarl, give double strike and the dethrone counter to the Treasonous Ogre that's attacking. Hit somebody for 18 damage, gain 18 life back on turn 3.
And then use the mana or something.
Do you think you would ever see that in CEDH?
No, there wouldn't really... I don't know why you would do that, right? Yeah.
Right, like, but like you're presenting like killing somebody by like turn 4. I think that fits in like the bracket 4.
Yeah.
Now, there's going to be some people I think that will like see this sort of thing and be like, well, I mean, I think that's more like a bracket 3 thing. And it's like, okay, whatever. I'm not
yeah. But yeah, so... one of the important things that I guess we haven't talked about is the game changers, but is there anything else you want to talk about before we move on to the game changer list?
No, I think we better talk about the game changers because this is the outside of the intent and the experience aspect. I think this is going to be perhaps the biggest part of the bracket system, and it's the part that definitely has people, I think, the most upset so far.
Yeah,
has the most disagreement about. But once again, we gotta say this is in beta, and they're still working on this.
And I would like to say that if you don't, once we get to the game changer list, if you don't like the game changer list, Gavin said with almost 100% certainty, and I think he said late April when they hopefully come out of beta, there will be, he said almost 100% certainty there will be changes to the game changer list. So it's not set in stone. Mm-hmm. If you have a problem with it, he wants to let him know, and they'll readdress it potentially.
Yeah, so like we said earlier, this is a list of 40 cards that have been noted for their power and their ability to, as it says, change the game in a way. So this includes a variety of types of cards. We're going to talk about a few of them specifically, but I don't want to just read a 40 card list at everyone.
Exactly.
So I thought it would be maybe helpful. We would recommend everyone read this article. We're going to mention that a few times. But I wanted to go through the distribution of colors on this list. So out of those 40 cards, we've got 5 white cards, we got 9 blue cards, 7 black cards, 2 red cards, 3 green cards, 4 multicolor, notably those are all legendary creatures, and 10 artifacts.
The thing that most people would think of when they see this might be like, oh, where are all the red and green cards? Why aren't they on the list? Like, why are there only, 2 red cards on the list? There's a lot of good red cards. And I don't think it really comes down to what they're doing. I mean, this isn't a list of just taking out powerful cards in the format, right? Like, of course, there's a lot of good, powerful green and red cards, but they tried to keep it small. There's a lot of good cards in the game.
I will say the 2 red cards are Jessica's Will and Underworld Breach, and I would personally like to hear, outside of maybe, and we'll cover these later on a little bit, if anyone could in the comments tell us like what other red cards should be on there. If you really think about it, like maybe Deflecting Swat, maybe Mana Geyser, what currently They banned out the 1 card that would also be on the... So they've dealt with that. It's been taken care of.
Darkside is that card. Yeah. I think some people maybe might say Wheel of Fortune. Don't think I would agree with that personally. I don't know about you. Probably not. If you're going to do anything. But, I don't know. It's one thing, actually, I want to talk about the bracket list notably is you might be like, oh, where's, all of the extra turn spells? Why there's no Gamble? They're missing, Gamble as a tutor on this list. Those kind of cards, I mean, they're kind of already dealt with in some sense by the conditions on the other brackets.
They're kind of covered. Like the combo pieces, like notably, they left off things like Ashnod's Altar and Phyrexian Altar.
Yeah,
stuff like that. Like you said, falls under the kind of conditions that they've set out for brackets 1 through 3. And there's not really a need to address the game changer cards for brackets 4 and 5. So I think personally, 40 cards, it might seem like too small. It seems like maybe, like people will definitely say, and I maybe agree a little bit, that there could be more green cards on there. It seems like a little unequal distribution. I think I personally like that it's majority blue cards.
Yeah.
And artifacts or colorless cards. I think that's pretty fitting. It's still open to change.
Yeah, it's also like it's interesting because when if I think about like a green, some people say like, oh, the Great Hen should be on the list, and sure, maybe, yeah, whatever. But a card that, in my mind, seems like a card that would be on this list, kind of in that same vein of, like, the altars you were mentioning, is a card like Earthcraft. I think Earthcraft is pretty strong and pretty insane. But, I mean, you kind of can understand that idea that, like, oh, okay, but that's like a combo card.
Right, it's possibly being lumped in with, like, the combo thing. Because, like, how often is this... I mean, I would do it. I mean, I could see doing it. Like
That's
the value Earthcraft.
That's the funny thing is, though, I think if Earthcraft wasn't like an infinite combo and it was played as like a value piece, it would still be strong enough to maybe be on this list. And I think the fact that it is a combo means it's not on the list, because it's like, okay, if you have an Earthcraft, you obviously have the potential to combo off before turn 6.
So there's pretty good reasons why things might not be on this list.
Yeah.
So the amount of game changers, it affects what bracket you're going to fall into, but Rule 0 still exists within the system, and like you're still going to have to exercise like a little bit of critical thinking, because like it's possible within these rules, even though it says like bracket 3 you've got maximum 3 game changers, you could have a deck that fits like the criteria for a bracket 2, but it really should be a bracket 3. Or you could have like a bracket 1 with 1 game changer, but it's still like such a bad, like you shouldn't have to say like, oh, this is bracket 3 now because I have Jessica's Will in it.
People will look at the bracket system and they'll think like you're saying, they'll think like, okay, no game changers 2, game changers 3, too many game changers 4. Like you say, like it's really a little bit more nuanced than that. It's not quite like that. I mean, Gavin, I think, even put a, like one of the precons had Jessica's Will in it. Obviously, that deck is not a bracket 3. It's probably a bracket 2 deck, right? It's possible you have a bracket 3 deck that has 4 game changers. Honestly, it's possible, right? Like,
yeah, it's just unlikely that you could have 4 or more game changers and the deck still be a bracket 2.
Yeah,
I've heard a few people. I've listened to a few things. I can't remember exactly where I saw it. People have been talking about the idea of like, well, I've got my deck that's like a bracket 4, like I could make like a bracket 5 that has no game changers in it.
It's like, maybe.
I don't know. I feel like, I mean, I will be proven wrong saying this. Do you think there's like a viable, like a good CEDH deck that's playing none of these cards, none of these game changers? Not a single one?
Well, so yeah, all the CEDH decks probably would be, I would expect that most of them would be playing some number of them, if it's not the fast mana artifacts. Like I'm thinking like, what are the decks that wouldn't play the fast mana? And it's like maybe like a white stacks deck. Okay, you're playing Dramath Magistrate, you're playing Light and Tutor, you're playing Smothering Tithe, right? Stuff like that. So I feel like most, if not all, CEDH decks should have some of the cards.
Or if they're doing that, like they're taking like their existing deck that like is already like that type of deck that requires the fewest number possible, and then switching them out with like some card of like comparable power level that does a similar thing. Actually, and being like, see, I beat the system.
I was gonna say like it's possible that you're building like your bracket, your like deck, which is truly a bracket 4 deck, but you cut down to 3 game changers, right? And then you play like 6 cards that are like pseudo game changers, like cards that are in consideration for being game changers. And it's like, okay, your deck is clearly trying to do something stronger than maybe what a bracket 3 deck would be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see like a mono green, like just because there aren't a lot of green game changers, deck being a bracket 4 or something. Like that's obviously very possible.
So just please try to like exercise the critical thinking. It's going to be hard because people were looking for hard objective rules for how this should work. But like Architect has started adding like an auto scoring bracket thing based on like checking for like game changers or certain types of cards. I think it will say, I think, that my Arcades deck or my Verena deck are bracket 2 due to lack of game changers.
Lack of game changers, lack of combos, right?
But given the descriptions and the understanding of the bracket system, I understand that those decks are notably stronger than the average precon and can do some very strong things. So there's obviously more to it than that, and people are going to try and do this thing like, oh well, it says that my deck's a bracket 2, so I've got no game changers, I can do whatever I want.
Yeah, and I'm not playing stacks. I'm just playing stacks-ish stuff. So obviously I'm a bracket 1 deck. No, it's about the intent. It's about, there's more nuance to it than the literal hard and fast rules.
Yeah, if you're looking at the system and using this as the excuse to like try and teach somebody a little lesson about how like you can make the stacks deck, like you just fundamentally don't understand something about Commander, and like And I've got a system later in this, towards the end of the document, that I'm going to address. I'm going to fix this problem.
Exactly. Well, yeah, and not just say you don't understand something about Commander. You don't understand the bracket system. You have a misunderstanding of the bracket system. You either are intentionally misunderstanding it, or you didn't read it, or something like that. So we'll get into that stuff a little bit later. But
and as you said, Gavin said almost certainly this list will change in their next update. I think they said, was it March, April?
I think they said late April, I think.
Okay. So that's exciting. Expect your next podcast around then. So unless you want to say anything more about the we've got another little section to talk about some more game changer stuff later on.
But just to move on, yeah.
How do we think the brackets are actually going to improve EDH?
I think that the brackets in general do a better job than the previous power level system as a way to talk about your games, because I mean, you could argue back in the day when you had power levels, right? You'd be like, oh yeah, my deck's a 7. And we're going to get into more of that discussion a little bit later. But I think the bracket job, even if it just ends up being my deck's a 2, my deck's a 3, I feel like it incentivizes a better discussion than the power level system. Like, it allows you to... One thing that I think I've heard people talk about is like, okay, I get to say like, my deck's a 3, I've got a couple game changers in there, I play a Jessica's Will and an Underworld Breach or something, right? So, you can maybe expect me to... you might understand like, okay, he might assemble those two together and make a bunch of mana turn and go off, right? Like, that gives me a pretty good understanding of what your deck might be trying to do, right? So... I think it does a good job overall of that. It encourages a rule zero discussion more so than I think the power level system did.
Yeah, I think that biggest thing is going to be common language that people can have.
Yeah.
Outside of... Because people could before, and people did this, we always had the 1 to 10 scale, which it sounds like common language because everyone's talking 1 to 10, everyone's arriving at the... So it's like, we're all doing... But like... What that actually means is if it was going to be quote like objective thing to look at, if we were using the 1 to 10 scale, people would look at that r/EDH giant infographic that has a novel's worth of text. And to be fair, like this also has a lot of information to consume, but like the r/EDH scale has a lot of info on it for its 10 different points, most of which don't apply to most people.
Yeah.
And people were aware of a 1 to 10 scale, and like people think intuitively they know what that means. But I bet you when people were using the 1 to 10 scale, most of the people doing that had never actually read that thing because it's something...
It feels intuitive, right? You're like, oh yeah, 1 to 10? I don't need to think about that at all. That's obvious, right? Like it's 1 to 10.
And also that scale, it's... Even if it was an incredibly popular post, it's still a Reddit post. Like, what percentage of Magic players, and this maybe it is more than I think it is, but like, how many people are like scouring r/EDH for information on how to matchmake their Commander games at the LGS? And most people probably aren't doing that. Whereas like this, and it is kind of like a little bit of like an appeal to an authority thing, but this is directly handed down from Wizards of the Coast and the Commander format panel, which I think just makes it like easier to find, and also it makes it easier for people to agree on as like a respectable authority.
It adds a layer of legitimacy for sure. Also, one thing just to note real quickly, like Gavin stressed this, so I feel like I should mention it. It is not literally like the bracket system is not a rules system. It's not... You're not forced to use brackets. It's supposed to be a tool. Gavin acknowledges that there are going to be probably a sizable chunk of people who ignore the bracket system. I hope that isn't super large. I mean, I think it serves a purpose, but
people with existing groups,
they know,
just don't need it.
Yeah, like Eli, I think if we were to go and hang out and play cards, with people that maybe we already play with at our game store, it's fun it's kind of cool to use the bracket system, but we don't need to, right? Like we don't need it.
Yeah, because we've addressed like the biggest problem of Commander, I think, when we're playing with our friends and people that we like. You should hope when you're playing with your friends your biggest consideration was, do I want my friends to be able to play the game? Do I want them to have a good time?
Mm-hmm.
And you're more likely, I think, as sad as this might be to say, to practice that with your friends and people that you care about than with strangers. And I think the average Commander player just isn't that equipped to practice that level of empathy with strangers.
Yeah.
And something like this might be... Because why... I mean, and I don't fault them for that, because, like, why should somebody have to think... If a card's not banned, if it's not on something like the Game Changers list, why should you have to, like, think there's any kind of moral considerations about playing it? That's such a weird thing about this format that just doesn't apply anywhere else, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to people. Exactly. It's not very intuitive.
Yeah. And another thing that I think is cool about the brackets and how it can help is I really do think that the bracket system can encourage people, myself especially, to try building decks in different ways. So I feel like it gives me it gives me a nudge to be like, oh, I should make a couple, one or two bracket 2 decks, or I should try making this kind of deck. So it can be a good source of inspiration, I think, or a good maybe even like a guide for deck building if I'm looking for one. Of course, everyone's gonna build decks there in different ways, but if I'm looking like to try to make a deck for a certain kind of game, I can maybe use the bracket as a guide. Be like, yeah, I'll build the quintessential 3 in my mind, and then I'll be able to I'll have the language to share that with people, assuming that they understand brackets in the same way that I do.
Yeah, or maybe if the main thing pushing up a deck like my Chumbo Tribal, my Jund, Kresh the Bloodbraided, big creatures deck, is the fact that it has Bolas's Citadel in it, maybe I should... Because I always used to, before this ever happened, and before they put it on the Game Changers list, I would feel the need to preface, this is a pretty fair, medium type of deck. It's just like good ramp, like big creatures, some good card advantage, all strong cards, but Bolas's Citadel turns the game on its head. I could just like go from having nothing to winning in like a turn because of that card.
It's like where your deck is mostly fair, but there's a couple cards that maybe if you draw and like play at the right time might be a little bit of a feel bad. Another person might feel like you were kind of tricking them in some way. But now, at least now, it's not perfect, but you can maybe you take it out, maybe you just mention it.
And I think Gavin mentioned on the EDHTakes episode, or maybe it was one of the other guys, Dana or Matt, talking about the idea that like if the bracket system encourages people to play less of these game-changing, sometimes incredibly toxic cards, I think Gavin sees that as actually a pretty good thing.
Yeah.
And it's not just people they're not just doing that necessarily. There's going to be some bad actors that are like doing that just to try and like cheat or break the system. But as Gavin has said many times now, the system cannot account for bad actors.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be more likely that people are forced to, maybe now that there's something handed down directly from WotC and like a more objective view on this, you're forced to kind of grapple with the fact that you're playing some incredibly strong cards in decks that maybe they don't belong in.
Yeah, maybe you're not trying, like maybe what your goal is for the deck is to be a bracket 2, but you're ending up pushing it too far, and maybe this gives you that reality check, right? So you can be like, okay, center myself again. I'm trying to play with people that maybe play bracket 2s in my area. People play like a pre-con-ish kind of game, right? Why am I trying to play Bolas's Citadel,
like,
right?
Our friend Jesse, he's got a Dimir deck that I consider a pretty reasonable, pretty normal commander deck, probably like a pretty solid 3. And then like there was one game we were playing where I think he not only broke out like Dothy Voidwalker, but like Opposition Agent in like the same game, and like a Notion Thief too. And we were just like, what the hell, Jesse? What's going on here? And he had the correct answer, I will say. He said, well, I got to keep Spencer in check. And so in that case, you better play as many game changers.
Godspeed, Jesse. Yeah. Thank you. No, but like it really is like he was doing some pretty good, pretty fair things, and obviously Dothy Voidwalker, I don't think that's not on the game changer list, but it feels like kind of like a pseudo card. I actually think that's a cool thing about the bracket system is if there's cards that I personally consider to be like really strong, or that I think should be on the Game Changer, I can just choose to, not play a lot of them in my bracket 3 deck, or not play them in my bracket 2 decks. Like if I think Dauthi Voidwalker is like a broken bracket card, probably shouldn't be putting that in my bracket 2 deck, right?
Or I could, now that we have that like language, like if people get the understanding of like what a Game Changer means, I could be like, well, this deck doesn't technically have any Game Changers, but Dauthi Voidwalker is kind of like a Game Changer.
Yeah.
Like especially if I know that somebody's playing
a graveyard
a lot, like a graveyard deck or something. Well,
Or
Dauthi Voidwalker, Dauthi Voidwalker, it's more like if I know my opponents are going to be casting spells, I feel like I'm going to need to...
if my opponents are going to be casting any spells that I'd like to pay for free.
Yeah, so that's maybe a different issue. Were there any other big positives that you want to talk about? We've got a few things that we might touch on some more stuff later, but to me, I think common language, source of authority, constant updates, being in the hands of Gavin, I think he has proven himself to be a positive force for good in this format now.
Yeah. Actually, I do have one more thing I want to say that I like about the bracket system is I think I'm a little bit unique here in that I tend to be a little bit down on the over-explaining your deck Rule 0 conversation. That's not to say that I'm not trying to warn my opponents if I'm doing something broken, right? Obviously, like that's good intent. You want to be open with what you're trying to do in your game. But I think that the bracket system can encourage a more easy way to kind of share what you're trying to do without like giving like the whole byline of your deck. As some content creators may suggest, like you gotta have your 4 things you say. What are you trying to do? When are you trying to win by? I think that can be a little bit exhausting sometimes, and I think the bracket system is a good happy medium where it's a little bit easier to talk without.
If people understand the system, you can say the bracket and maybe one other thing.
Yeah,
I think you could probably cover most everything. And the problem with any of these systems, it's still going to be possible that you do that conversation like, oh, here's my bracket, here's a notable thing, and then something happens where there's like some, like it's maybe unclear, like if it was okay within the rules of the brackets or it was unintentional, and that's still going to happen and cause hard feelings. But I think that's always going to come down to more of a personal thing, and you're going to have to give people some benefit of the doubt practicing this, especially early on.
Someone's like, oh, I'm playing my bracket 2 dinosaur deck, and I just got mana drained on my commander. What the hell? And it's like, well, it's just what can you do? Sometimes that's going to happen. But I agree. So why don't we start talking about some of the downsides of the brackets?
What do we see about potential issues with the brackets? What would we like to see changed? First thing I wanted to talk about, and this has been a common criticism over the last week, is this still going to be too much information for the average player, especially the average less enfranchised player playing pickup games with randoms at the game store? Is it still too much for them to be expected to read and comprehend?
I think just to start off on that, one thing that Gavin talked about that I do wholeheartedly agree with is that it has a slightly higher barrier to entry in that you have to spend a couple minutes thinking about it and reading maybe an article or something. But overall, it's going to save you more time in your games in the future. Yeah,
exactly. Right. Like we said, you get to cut down those. You get to change the game of 20 questions to
3, 4,
2 statements.
Yeah. But maybe it takes you. Maybe you got to listen to a podcast about the brackets. Maybe you have to read the article that Gavin posted. Spend 10 minutes doing that. Whatever. So it might take a little bit more digging in there. And the important thing is is it fair to expect Magic players to go out and find an article and read about it if they want to talk about brackets or if they want to understand it well? And I think the answer is yes for that. I think it is fair to expect that, honestly.
I think if people actually want to practice it, it's kind of like a sort of opt-in investment where if you want to know how it works, you've almost got to read the article, you almost have to go beyond just like the little graphic and reading the game changers list
and apply some critical thinking skills.
You could maybe even just possibly skim the article, and like if you have questions about it, there's a Q&A where it seems like I've really got to hand it to Gavin, and this is supposed to be a criticism thing, but he has a Q&A section at the end of this article, which was, you know, this was the first day that this stuff was coming out, where it feels like he preempted every possible question, like every major issue people could have with the system. He answers the question.
And I still saw people on Reddit asking those questions that were written in the article. And the reason for that, and this is probably my biggest complaint with the bracket system, with the bracket system, but more so with the rollout of the bracket system, is I think that the graphic that they put up, that they released, that has kind of like the hard and fast like rules for what defines each bracket by what you can and can't put on it. I think that was actually kind of a mistake to put out. And what I mean by that is that infographic does not carry with it the nuance of what each bracket represents, what experience, the intent, all that sort of stuff. And it kind of just gives like this kind of slight objective version.
Yeah, I guess in the case of anything like this, if you provide your player base with a shortcut to information, they're always going to take it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not, like, they're not doing anything wrong by that, but yeah, you're going to have to make it clear that there's, like, maybe the little graphic should have had like a C, like, questions, like
read the article on the graphic or something, right? Because
and that way it allows you, like, if you do have like questions or criticisms, rather than just being like, because, you know, this is a sad thing to me that, like, I don't know if this is a Magic player thing or if this is just like a thing in nerd hobbies, when there's something like this, or there's ever a source of authority and it seems like there's a problem or a flaw in the system, people will immediately be like, I bet they didn't think about this.
Yeah.
I bet these people who it's literally their jobs to think about this stuff, I bet I know better. I bet they didn't. And Gavin acknowledges the system, and any system like this, will never be immune to bad actors. It's kind of like, this to me feels like kind of a safety system. It's like, imagine there's like a river, right? And you've put like a weak little dinky fence around the river. Now that's not designed to stop the average person from climbing the fence and jumping into the river.
Yeah.
It's to prevent the average person, the good actor, the average low investment player at the game store, from falling in, where like they might, like, it's to stop like a 2-deck from getting stuck in a game with a 4-deck. It's not to stop somebody building a 4-deck and saying it's a 2-deck so that they can play with the 2 decks.
Yeah, like the day of, the day after, and even up to a week after, I'm still seeing posts and comments on Reddit, in the official EDH like discussion page on their Discord server, and also from like content creators' YouTube videos, asking questions and like pointing out problems with the bracket system that are directly addressed by Gavin in the article and in the Q&A sections of the article. So a couple examples here. People, I've seen a content creator, I've seen a bunch of people on Reddit being like, does this mean I can't play Rampant Growth in my bracket 2 deck? It's pretty clearly stated in the article that obviously your land tutors does not count. People being like, well, they didn't factor in that I'm building my Stacks bracket 1 deck where I can literally play like a competitive-ish deck, and I don't have any game changers, so it's a bracket 1 deck. No, if you read the article and read what a bracket 1 deck is, it is a theme deck, or a deck that's not trying to...
Or you got people being like, they didn't make Soul Ring a game changer? Really?
And then there's a literal Q&A, why did we not make Soul Ring a game changer? And then he talks about it. So I'm sorry for ranting for a moment, but also on that same topic, I have been increasingly frustrated at, I don't want to name a lot of names here, but I've seen some pretty big content creators make content about this system that, from the things that they're saying, I can only assume that they have not read the article. And I think that is unironically, like, you should be ashamed if you're trying to educate people and like spread the system, and you have not read the article and you're just going based off of that graphic, I think that you are kind of being dishonest and like causing harm, causing misinformation.
Right, because I don't know if I want to say, as sad as it is to say, it really might not be reasonable to expect because I think the average Magic player, the average Commander player, actually has a very low level of engagement with content about the game. It really might not be reasonable for those people to expect even
slightly pretty enfranchised players,
even maybe like 50% of the Commander community to have fully read the article.
Yeah.
But like you said, as far as us content creators about Magic, whose job it is to do stuff about Magic and consume this content and read this and make it
disseminate it,
consumable to their audiences, like you said, I think it is it's one thing that we can do. It's a responsibility.
If it's anyone's responsibility, it'd be a content creator's, right? If anyone.
Like really, like you're gonna make like a video about this, or you're gonna like how many subscribers you gotta have before like you can be expected to take 10 minutes to fully. Like I said, we've been talking about this. We've been working on this like off and on, like because like we have a high level of engagement and passion for Magic and Commander. We've been thinking about this for over a week and consuming different videos about just to like get a good idea on like what is the benefit, what are the problems with this,
what's people's perceptions,
because as many people have pointed out, and Gavin especially, why I know that things are in a good hands, it's because Gavin especially has been pointing out this is a work in progress. If there's problems with it that I did not see somehow, I want you to point them out to me and I want you to let me know. The problem is, like you said, every Redditor, every YouTuber, all these people, they're pointing out problems that aren't actual problems.
Yeah.
They're pointing out problems that have been addressed that they did think of. I would like to see more people working on the things that actually do need to be fixed or addressing that, rather than just being like, well, what does this even mean? You know, like.
And like I was saying earlier, I don't want to harp on the rollout too much, but like I was saying, I genuinely do feel like maybe not a full on mistake. That's maybe a little too harsh, but I do think that infographic kind of does a little bit more harm than it does good. I think it could have been done a little better. So actually something that I thought was interesting was I was listening to Gavin's EDH cast podcast he did, and he talked about how they were really excited for Magic Fest Chicago, which is going on right now as we're recording this. And he said they got they managed to condense the whole bracket system down to what they called like a 1-page document. So they were handing out. He said they were gonna hand out like little 1-page descriptions of the bracket system. And my only question about that sounds amazing. Why didn't they release that?
Kind of a similar thing to what Rachel did. You saw like her graphic.
I think so.
Where she took the short little condensed version of the bracket, like kind of power different their rules, and then she added the intent portion to it.
Yeah.
So just adding a few sentences each onto those.
Yeah, it goes a long way.
Yeah.
So actually, so I would have loved to see that, but I have to take a second and just give Gavin and the guys and the gals a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, because I'm not actually sure that they like intended this like 5 bracket system to be spread as the graphic alone, because do you know if they, I mean, I know that they have the graphic in their article, but I don't know if they publish that image just like as a, like, do they just like post that to Twitter and be like, hey, look at the brackets? I would assume maybe they just expected that image to be consumed within the context of the article, right? Maybe it was co-opted and people just started spreading it out of nowhere. So maybe that's the case. I'm not sure. So maybe it's not their failing. Maybe it's the failing of
and like
other people.
It probably was their intention to provide some kind of shortcut to the information, just to even like get people like talking about it and consuming it. But like you said, it kind of backfired a little bit,
in my opinion.
I think that was a criticism Saffron Olive had on the Commander Clash podcast too, that like he is very cynical about the system and thinks that people like Magic players are pretty much always going to try and
power game break
the system and like kind of min-max for it.
Well, and Gavin, he even talked about that. He's aware of that because he said in the podcast, the EDHTakes guys, he's like, I know Magic players are gamers, right? Like they're gonna be gaming
That's
stuff,
a good
right?
way to
He
put
said
it,
that. That's
yeah.
what he said. So, they're very aware of that. So, take with that what you will.
So, one of my biggest criticisms of the bracket system, I think, is we've talked about the 1 to 10 power level scale, and one of the biggest problems with that was always the "my deck is a 7" meme. And that arose because the way that they made that scale, or typically how that scale was made, people would rank pre-con at 5 as if it was the average experience.
Yeah.
Everything below that, like, I think they had their 1, which is pretty close. Like 1 through 3 was pretty close to like what bracket 1 is now.
Sure.
And then like 4 and 5 pre-con. Anything above, and then they had 9 and 10 on that scale were reserved for CEDH. It was like bad CEDH and like good CEDH.
And bad CEDH, yeah.
And so the scale, if your deck was better than a pre-con, lower than CEDH, it was 6, 7, 8.
Yeah.
And within any, as Gavin mentioned, like within like an odd numbered system, people always gravitate towards the middle.
Yeah.
So nobody wants to say my deck is a 6 because like, oh, my deck's barely better than a pre-con. My deck's at least 2 tiers above a pre-con.
Well, yeah. Also, like that. That's funny though, because like it's a larger scale, so it's 10. So it's like only 1 better than a pre-con. No way, right? Like my deck. Like if it was like a 3 power scale, you'd be like, oh yeah, 1 over a pre-con. Sure, that makes sense. Like pre-con better than a pre-con and like CDH. Sure, mine's better than a pre-con. But on a 10 thing scale, like no, I'm like a 7 or an 8, right? My deck's really good. I'm an 8, you know. And like you were saying, Eli, I do think this bracket system falls into that problem a little bit.
We've gone from 6, 7, 8 to, in my opinion, 2, 3, 4, because the problem with the previous scale, and this is one of my biggest problems, and we've complained a lot, and I hate to keep going on about like the CEDH thing, because like what percentage of the average, like I really don't know what these numbers would be, and I don't think outside of the I think on the EDH cast, like they use like the Architect system to like draw. Well, that's not really how this works. So like what percentage of commander decks are a 1 on the bracket system, and what percentage are a 5 out of the entirety of the commander format? I'm gonna take a real rough shot in the dark. I think it might be like for each of those less than 5%. Like less than 5% of decks
So you mean like
R1,
yeah,
and less than 5% are CDH.
Yeah.
So that leaves you 2 being the average pre-con.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit stronger, maybe a little bit worse. 3 being the new every deck is a 7.
Mm-hmm.
Covering 3 covers a lot of ground, but at least we have some rules within that, where I think a problem with like 7 before is people would do one of 2 things with 7. I put it this way before on other podcasts, where you either do this thing where you round up because you think your deck is better than it is, and like you want to think like you're really good or like you've got a good deck, so you do that, or you round down because you're afraid of looking like a fool if you get smoked, so you're trying to preserve your own ego a little bit.
Yeah, like it's like a pride thing. Like if you're rounding up, it's like I'm a really good deck builder, and if you're rounding down, it's like I don't want my pride to be shattered.
Yeah, it kind of like depends on like what type of ego you have.
Yeah.
And so everyone, to be safe, you end up at 7, because on the old system, when we had like 8, like I feel like you and I, maybe in some old play groups, we would talk about, like we would refer to the 8 out of 10, right?
Mm-hmm.
As the high power commander.
Sure.
Which is now what 4 covers. And 4, I think, I have a hard time wondering with this distribution, because I think the majority is going to be 3.
Yeah.
But what percentage is 2 versus 4? Which is more common, the power gamers or the ultra casuals?
I brought up something that I thought was interesting, and that was not about how many players they are at each category, but about how many like total commander games are on each category. And I guess, and that's kind of a rhetorical question, but what I'm kind of alluding to is that there might be like half of the commander population that just play 2s.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Like they might not play a lot of commander. Like you might have like a couple
at most once a week, every other week, because these are people these are people with families. These are people with like busy full-time jobs, other hobbies and stuff. So they're not super invested, but they're a larger portion of the whole Magic community. Whereas the 4s, smaller portion of the community, but they're probably
jamming games every week,
at least once a week. Regular play group, maybe playing for like
maybe online
noon to 10 p.m. Maybe playing Magic online or something. Yeah, that's an interesting point.
So I mean I don't know about you, Eli, but I personally know people who aren't the most invested in Commander. They play, I don't know, whenever maybe if they get into a phase they'll be playing more, but maybe they play 3, 4, 5 times a year, something like that, right? Like not a ton. And I think most of their decks are probably going to gravitate more towards the bracket 2 side, right?
Yep.
So it's hard to say like who should the brackets be made for, right? Do you want to encompass the most amount of players or the most invested players, or what do you want to do? And it's a hard question to answer. But I will say I do think that the bracket 4 specifically does a better job than the 8 out of 10 did at distinguishing between bracket 4 and 3 and like 8 and 7. I think bracket 4 feels a little bit like I feel like I'm not going to accidentally get in bracket 4 games if I'm not trying to, whereas I feel like I might get in 8 power out of 10 games when I'm not trying to. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is that fair?
And people, as we talked about earlier, have been like complaining about the difference between bracket 4 and 5 on the scale. I've heard a pretty good, I like this, that people say you don't accidentally make a CEDH deck.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're doing like a bracket 4, like you probably should know on the system what you're up to. So my biggest problem then becomes bracket 3 covers a lot of ground. And is this just the new every 7. Deck is a 7? Most decks are going to be a 3, but at least we have actual rules now about like what belongs in that and like what that should feel like, what that should look like. Now that's within the system, within the scale though, within each bracket, there's a large like
range of power levels, right?
Like you could have like a pretty weak 3 and you could have some incredibly strong 3s that you could still make an argument aren't quite a 4.
Mm-hmm.
And like, how do you know that? Like, where is the line? One thing that I wanted to just kind of like ask a question of, and I'm not sure on, is the game changers rule for bracket 3. Like, how did they come up with 3 as the right number to differentiate between a bracket 3 and a bracket 4? Like 3 as the cutoff. Like, it's weird. It kind of feels right in a way, but like I don't know why, and I don't know if it's possible they might change this. Notably, we put our decks into Architect, and even of some of like our kind of stronger decks, I think I maybe have one deck that goes to 4 game changers.
Yeah, and most of my decks that are like trying to be trying to be stronger, it's usually around 3. It's almost, for a couple of them, it's like exactly 3. It's like they're 3, and like you're saying, I don't know what about it. 3 kind of just feels right. Is it just like happening into the right answer? I don't know.
I don't know how he did it, but it seems like somehow Gavin, and I've got to give some. I don't know how much credit to give to the Commander format panel. I know that they helped a lot, but I'm just gonna use Gavin as shorthand for all that.
Yeah.
It seems like he's figured everything out. It seems like he's just like he just knows something. He sees. He's got the universe, and so he sees like a hidden spectrum of colors for this sort of stuff.
He's looked through every universe and found the perfect one.
Like, so I'd like to open up that question to the audience. Like, why 3? And does that feel right? Because maybe I'm just too much of a Gavin fanboy now and giving too much credit to the bracket system. But 3 kind of feels right. I mean, he worked it with the Commander format panel, and they found that it seemed that the average number of decks tended to lean like towards that 3 number and kind of like lean towards that middle bracket.
And also on that same level, like the size of the bracket system seems about right too. I don't know why that it's 40 exactly, but like, and that's a clean number
for the game changers.
He
mentioned on one podcast that if you have a deck like, and say the number was 5, if you've got 5 out of 40 game changers, that's what, 1/8 of them?
Yeah.
Like, that feels like a sizable amount, and I'm trying to think, if say the number was 5, what do decks look like if they have 5 game changers in them?
Well, to start, they're probably several colors, right? Because it's a lot easier to get more game changers the more colors. Or
yeah, it's going to be tough to make monocolored outside of blue decks. Maybe
I think actually the way that you probably get up into the higher game changers numbers is when you start playing fast mana, right?
Yeah.
When you're like, I'm jamming in Mox Diamond, Mana Vault, Ancient Tomb, and also just like, I don't know, like the One Ring, you're playing like the colorless like fast mana cards, and then your colors stuff as well. Then you're like. And I think that tracks, right? We would expect decks with a lot of fast mana to be high, like a bracket 4, right? Like that's usually not super appreciated in bracket 3, I think.
Yeah, so far I think I have 2 bracket 4 decks, and the one that I put on Architect so far, it's bracket 4 because it has Ancient Tomb, Smothering Tithe, Underworld Breach, and
Justice Will maybe, or no, not that one.
Enlightened Tutor.
Enlightened Tutor, yeah, that's the one. Yeah, and I've got a deck that has, Jessica's Will, Cyclonic Rift, and Smothering Tithe in it, right? And those are the exact 3. One from each color, perfect. But yeah, it's. What do you think, guys? Do you think that's about the right number?
But there's room to change it.
Yeah.
But so far, on purely a vibes basis, and the fact that it seems to be suiting me personally pretty well right now.
Yeah.
Because I would prefer to say most of my decks fall in 3. I've got a few that notably I would prefer them to stay in the bracket 4 for the most part, and I don't really play that often as a result of that. But 3 gives me the most ground to play with the most people, and like we said, it doesn't necessarily mean... We played some games this last Tuesday, I think, where we all technically fell, I think, in the bracket 3.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean, and this is going to be the confusing and upsetting part for a lot of people, the decks are not equal power level.
Yeah.
They are just, we're able to have a fair game and a good experience.
Yeah. And yeah, actually, it's cool because the decks that were what I would consider the strongest in those games didn't always win, right? Like a deck that maybe, a first draft deck or something that's not playing no game changers.
Yeah,
one.
There's always going to be the self-correcting social aspect of Commander, and the problem that arises with like power level scaling, or like maybe even within the bracket system now, is if you're playing games where it is not possible for multiple players to check the power imbalance.
Yeah.
Then you have a problem.
Yeah.
And then maybe you're experiencing the issue of 3 2s versus a 4. That's probably going to favor the 4 most of the time. 3 2s versus a 5? Oh my god, I don't even think that's possible. I don't even know if that's possible.
And I think that's kind of the intent of the game changer system, because when I look at the game changers and I think about some of the cards, pretty much all of the legendary creatures on the game changer list are cards that could presumably, quote unquote, as I've heard Gavin say about Smothering Tithe, like solo a table if left unchecked, right? Like not be able to be overcome by multiple pieces of interaction or something, right? I think of cards like a Smothering Tithe it's making a ton of mana, fast mana in colorless cards, all the legendary creatures. Like if you have like a Tergrid going off, or if you've got like a Bolas' Citadel that's going off, right, or your Cyclonic Rifting, right, your opponents. These are the kind of cards that you would think against decks that don't have ways to play on that level could potentially overcome all of your opponents together, right? So I think that's kind of interesting, and that makes sense why if you're playing a ton of these cards, like a bracket 4-ish kind of deck, maybe a bracket 2 deck could just fall over, right? And it wouldn't be a good experience.
And it should still be possible for
lower brackets
to play within like one bracket of each other. Like 3 3s could play with a 4, could probably be okay.
Yeah,
most of the time. 3 2s could play with a 3.
Mm-hmm.
A 1's gonna have to play with some 2s or 3s every so often, because like how many full-on 1 pods are there ever going to be?
That's actually, if you don't mind me talking about that a little bit, that's actually a criticism I have of the system personally. We were talking about 1s and 4s, 1s and 5s, stuff like that earlier. I'm kind of a known CEDH hater a little bit. If I'm gonna stake a real position that's a little bit inflammatory, I don't think that CEDH really belongs on the bracket system. I know Gavin, I heard him talk about it. They really do want to kind of like give them credit and like lend some respect to the community building and the work that the CEDH community has done. Now, I understand why if you're like a figurehead, that's very important, right? You don't want to isolate your players. I personally don't want them on the bracket system.
We've talked about this before, right? With the power level system, the idea is to like get games that are like relatively fair and get decks like within like one tier of each other, whatever that is, brackets or 1 out of 10. CEDH players, as far as I know, if they're playing the format or their version of the format as intended, you're not looking to play a CEDH deck with a bracket 4.
No.
That's just not CEDH then.
Maybe you could have a game like that, but I think it's a little bit different than playing like a 1 with a 2 or a 3 with a 4, right?
Like, you could play your CEDH deck versus 3 4s if you're okay with that, but if you're not okay with what you know is going to happen, or what you should know is going to happen, the game is a 3 versus 1.
You've built for like a very specific intent too with CEDH, right? You're building, like the whole point is like the meta, and you're taking that out, so it's not really you're kind of losing that in
so that's always been my complaint, is like why even have ever a tier on these things where it's only meant to play within its own environment, and it's not meant to like reach beyond that even by like 1 degree.
And Gavin talked about how like the CEDH system is really the only like proven example of like what the brackets are trying to be, which what he means by that is like when you say CEDH or bracket 5, whatever, everyone kind of knows what that is, right? And it kind of works that you don't, if someone says their deck's a CEDH deck, you kind of know that, I'm not going to play my other deck with it, right? It doesn't really work, right? So if that's the case, shouldn't that work just fine without them? Shouldn't they not need the bracket system? So I think they're mostly on there as like a sign of respect or like a nod to them. But I don't know if it's necessary, personally, from a practical standpoint. But that's just me. Also, on that same level, it's a similar thing where the bracket 1 decks I think are also on there as like a sign of respect. Like we understand. They say we understand. There's a lot of people who like to play like this worse than precon decks. But what's wrong with just having the base of the scale be precons, and then if you want to play a bracket 1, just saying we're just playing below bracket 1? Is that maybe it's shameful?
Maybe the purpose of 1 and 5 on the bracket system is less like to actually like engage with the rest of the system, and more to provide a floor and a ceiling. As like a power cap. Like you've got to have like, this is like the literal bottom that we can have, and this is the literal top.
I also think that it might be like to preserve dignity, if that makes sense. Like it honestly does. Like if there was no bracket 1, or I guess if bracket 1, if the base was precons, like saying like, oh, I'm playing worse than precons or whatever, maybe a little bit humiliating, right? Or like a little bit demeaning for yourself. You'd be like, oh yeah, I'm not even on the scale. Like I don't matter, right? And so I understand that, but I think the system might be better if it started at bracket but whatever, it's fine.
Gavin
I understand.
Mentioned the idea of maybe at some point making precons with like the bracket on them, and perhaps even making specifically bracket 1 precons at some point. And I want to raise the thought experiment to the audience. You and I have talked about this a few times already. Mm-hmm. Now, what would a bracket 1 precon have to cost? What would its monetary value be in order for it not to be insulting to the player base? Now, if there was a $20, maybe $10 Commander precon, I could buy that and play it out of the box. That might be worth it. But if they ever made a bracket 1 pre-constructed Commander deck, now assuming that they don't just put some like crazy value cards in it, like that's still going to be possible in bracket 1, right? You can still have good cards in your bracket 1 deck. But if they come out with that and they're charging $50 or whatever the average commander, whatever the MSRP ends up being, that feels wrong to me.
Yeah, I was telling you about this earlier. I really like the concept of. Well, I know bracket 2, core is supposed to be like the core experience, right? So if you're getting someone into Commander, maybe you pick up some precons, you play some core bracket, whatever core games. But I kind of like the idea of maybe they sell like if they are to make bracket 1 decks and make them cheap. It'd be pretty cool to be like, okay, here's your bracket 1, your set of you got 4 of them, whatever. Here's a bracket 1 deck with a pack of sleeves and a small plastic deck box for like $30, right? With that, all that included, that'd be pretty cool, I think.
That would be amazing value, and I think that would be actually a great product, even if the deck was like barely functional.
Yeah,
because you could have a couple of people like new to the game, they could buy those and play them against each other, and have everything they need to play like right away, pretty much.
Yeah, $30 for the sleeves, the deck, and the box, whatever, right? Like to start, and you wouldn't even need to make it very valuable, like you said, like. You could make it enough, right? But yeah, I think that could be a cool way to get someone into the format. And maybe you could even like in the inserts and stuff give them like, here's what you might want to do to bring this up to a 2, like here's some suggestions maybe from like the recent core set or something, like here's some cards you can put in or things you can change out. Yeah.
The last issue that I personally might have, or a lot of people are going to have, I think this is the biggest issue so far, is there's a lot of controversy with the Game Changers list and whether it should be more cards, should it be fewer cards. What would we personally change about the Game Changers list?
Yeah, I think the first card that stuck out to me immediately, and I'm not even saying that it necessarily shouldn't be on the list, but there's an argument for it, is when I was looking at them, I'm like, okay, yeah, all these white cards, because white's the first color on the list that when you're reading them, you're like, okay, Smothering Tide, all that stuff, and you're like, Trouble in Pairs, and you're like, okay, I mean, I can see that, but that's not a card that's really on my radar all the time.
It's a cracked card,
yeah.
But you and I had a conversation before recording this, where I got at the idea of, as much as I might personally hate Rhystic Study, and certain other types of cards like this, it seems strange to me that good card draw or good card advantage outside of like some certain broken cards like Bolas' Citadel should even be like a category of cards on this list, because they have Trouble in Pairs on, because there's just like so many of them that they can't fit on the list. If we're gonna have that as a category of card, it raises the question of like, why do you have this but you don't have this? Like, why do you have Trouble in Pairs but you don't have Consecrated Sphinx? Why do you have Ad Nauseam but you don't have Necropotence on the list?
Yeah.
Like, I think that raises a really good question. And then like you get in this thing of like, well, if you got this, you got to, and like they're clearly, the idea of the Game Changers list, and I'm not sure if this was the intention, the Commander ban list has what they call signpost bannings, where they put certain types of cards on there to signal this type of card, don't play it, it's not good. But whereas like the Game Changers list
doesn't do that.
It's supposed to be kind of like an objective system while also functioning as a potential like watch list for future bannings. So why should we say that Trouble in Pairs is necessarily more threatening to the format or the average Commander game than something like Necropotence? It just feels like it's hard to make that distinction, and a lot of people are pointing out it doesn't really feel fair for like, because the point of I think at least, given the fact that 4 and 5 on the bracket system don't care about Game Changers, it seems weird that in casual Commander, to a lot of people, where green is regarded as the most powerful color, it's affected the least by the Game Changers list. I mean, we're looking at Gaia's Cradle being 1 out of 3 cards on their Game Changers. That's just not a card you see. Like Vorinclex, I think that's a good choice for the Game Changers. Survival of the Fittest, I think they put that on there to cover up the kind of tutor. If you notice, like looking at the rest of the categories, except for red, like not having like Gamble, because it's just not necessarily the best tutor compared to the other ones. Every other color has their whatever their color tutor is, like Enlightened Tutor, Mystical Tutor, Vampiric Tutor. Green did not get Worldly Tutor.
Yeah. You know how much Gaia's Cradle costs, Eli? $800.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that's not a concern for all Magic players because people proxy cards and stuff. But
so it's almost as if it's like
kind of not.
Assuming people aren't proxying, it's like it's kind of soft banned by just being effectively like on the near on the tier of like Power 9. Yeah, it's just like that and like Tabernacle. Like, so to me, it seems like there's a few things that I might change. I mean, looking at the list, personally, I kind of like the idea that it's 40 cards because I know that like as far as like human memory, like the amount of things like in like a list of or like a sequence of things that we can remember is pretty small, but like 40 cards feels somewhat consumable. It feels pretty palatable.
Yeah.
Especially when like kind of like what the distributions are of like the colors. Like it's obviously it's going to be super easy for people to remember what the Gruul cards are or what the multicolor cards are. But if the list even became like, what if they brought it up to like 60 cards? Do you think it would be pretty easy to like forget stuff?
Well, I think it would be easy to forget stuff, but one thing that Gavin brings up about that is that, first of all, they don't know how high it can go with it being palatable, but also it might be okay if they like increase it over time. So like it's a little bit of a barrier to entry for new players, but as people that are in the format and playing, like as they add 2, 4, 3 cards here, a card here, it's not that bad because you're kind of slowly building up, right? That might be a way where that works. I think at least starting at 40 is pretty good. I think if you're looking to make room for other things, very broken cards, to be fair. I don't think I really see the need for the commanders being on there. You could probably get rid of all of, Winota, Granarbor, Yuriko, and Keenan specifically. Just because they kind of all are I feel like they're covered a little bit. Some of them are covered in the combo thing. Some are like, stacks-ish, so it's kind of implied. Maybe they need to be on there, but that's the feeling I have.
I also wanted to specifically kind of call out, we had this discussion about Ad Nauseam and how, like I said, the Game Changers list is only really meant to affect the bottom 3 brackets.
Yeah, because it's irrelevant for 4 and 5, right?
In the average casual commander deck outside, there's maybe 3 niche archetypes of deck where like Ad Nauseam like doesn't just make you die.
Yeah.
Or you actively like want, like I have a deck, like I talked about, my Marchesa deck that cares about losing life. I would maybe put Ad Nauseam in there. I'd maybe put it in a deck that can gain life super well. And I have a friend who has a Luris companion deck where he can't play things that cost more than 2 mana?
Yeah, everything's super low mana value.
So Ad Nauseam just becomes like 5 mana, draw like 20 for like pretty low life loss. Like, so to me, it feels like what is the deck, like what is the space in bracket 3 where that's like really like a broken card.
Sure. And I think on that same kind, maybe in a similar sense, I think Thassa's Oracle, unironically, like even though the card is obviously like a like insane combo piece, right? Like that's kind of covered, right?
It feels like it should be covered, like that and Expropriate being like a broken like the strongest extra turn spell, maybe
quote unquote chaining extra turns, right? But yeah, like Thassa's Oracle, like they say for bracket 4 and 5 it doesn't matter, right? For bracket 3 they say no, like your deck shouldn't have the ability probably to do like combos before late game, turn 6, 7, something like that, right? Well, decks with Thassa's Oracle are probably playing, I mean, not all of them, but maybe you're playing like Demonic Consultation, Thassa's Oracle. You can't do that, right? Like that's not allowed by the idea. Maybe you're just playing Thassa's Oracle in combination with like drawing your entire deck through something. But in that case, what's the difference between Thassa's Oracle and like the Jace that does that, or Lab Man, right? Like,
yeah. So we've got Thassa's Oracle on there compared to other maybe equally, I mean, not quite as effective, but like existing 2-card combos you can do in bracket 3. And then we've got Ad Nauseam, comparing that to like, I mean, like they've got Bolas to Citadel on the black. That's a card that like you can play like people will say like, oh, Bolus is if you're playing that in your like big mana deck, like that's not good deck building. That's not. No, it's still broken.
Yeah,
it's because it's casting the spells for like you've got 40 life. Like even if you're just like casting like 3 big creatures for like 20 life, and then you've maybe got like one way to like gain life. Like even if you don't like,
you're going for 6 from 6 mana to 20. Plus you drew the cards and played them, right?
Yeah, it's insane.
Also. One thing about you talking about ad nauseum, like what's the broken thing with ad nauseum, right? Like in CEDH, what's the thing that you do with ad nauseum? Ad nauseum, draw 30 cards, play 4 pieces of fast mana, combo and win, right? You have so if you're playing ad nauseum, you're not playing like hyper efficient cards with it. Is it that strong? Like
yeah, it's unlikely that you could make it that effective without also other game changers.
Like if you want to like try to game the system, you can be like, okay, ad nauseum plus like the spirit guides, like haste and mana dorks or something, like plus like 1 mana like reanimation, like reanimate and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, but that's jumping through a lot of hoops to do that where you're kind of just trying to cheat the system, right?
And then we talked about a little bit earlier, like as for like people might be like, oh, there's not a lot of red and green cards. As for red, at least, really think about it. Like what cards would we add to the list? I had Deflecting Swat maybe because it fills a similar role to those free counter spells.
Yeah.
Like it's pretty much just the same thing actually. So I think there's a pretty good argument for Deflecting Swat.
I think so.
Maybe Mana Geyser, which is become a pretty powerful card. Like people are starting to realize to the point where it's actually like $5 now.
Yeah. Maybe gamble, maybe
gamble to fit like the fact that they've just like decided to put all the 1 mana tutors on there,
except for the green one.
Because creatures die to removal, so we don't ever have to worry about creatures. No problem with creatures, you know.
Well, there's no more Dockside, so it's fine.
Yep. So we've got those for the red cards. Maybe I would put Treasonous Ogre. Do you think that could be like kind of fit in? It kind of feels like the ad nauseum a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, it feels like it's not quite there, right? At the fair level.
Like where it very much scales with like the power level of your deck, or your deck being like I said, those weird theme decks where either you care about losing life or you can gain life. Yeah. Otherwise, Treasonous Ogre, if you're not like immediately winning, if you're not playing a combo deck and you just play Treasonous Ogre, like you have access
to die.
Assuming you're at 40 life, you get 13 mana maximum out of that. So
then you're dead.
Yeah, and then you will die to most things in Commander.
Yeah.
So that's one that I could see maybe, but unless I'm really blanking on anything, I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of red as a color. You know, it's my second favorite color. Don't really feel like there's that many broken red cards now.
No, I agree there.
I think that Underworld Breach, very good shout. Like you said, I don't think it would make sense for Wheel of Fortune to ever be on there.
No, especially not if you know the blue one that's $3,000.
Well, because like blue as a color is just allowed to have like every like different variation of like Wheel of Fortune. It's got like Windfall and stuff like that.
Yeah, and black has, or sorry, not black. Red has several other like Wheel of Fortune-ish cards. Usually not as good as Wheel of Fortune, but you know, like they're similar.
Wheel of Misfortune should probably be on there because that card is ugly and annoying to resolve.
Based.
So get that on there. As far as green, I saw a lot of people talking about Craterhoof Behemoth. It's a potential addition. What do you think about that?
I'm kind of mixed on that. Like Craterhoof, like if we want to consider, like I think Craterhoof belongs in the list if what we're trying to do is like put on like the best version of like a really powerful effect, which maybe that is something that we want to do, right? Like maybe that is fair because Craterhoof is kind of just like the best way to leverage creatures to kill someone.
I think Craterhoof, as much as I might think it's like super powerful and like probably stronger than like a few cards on the list, it kind of fits like it's going to sound weird, it almost fits like the Thassa's Oracle thing, where it kind of, people will put Craterhoof Behemoth in decks that like don't necessarily like win super effectively via combat. They just have like a lot of creatures and mana dorks, and in that position, it's effectively acting like Tutor for Craterhoof is like a 2-card combo, like plus your board state of like thing like mana dorks and stuff that you're just like doing anyways.
But that usually doesn't come online. I mean, it could be quickly depending on it, but to kill everyone, it's like the turn 6, turn 7 like combo win, but it's like Craterhoof,
yeah,
right?
So it effectively just ends up like feeling like a combo. Like even like let's think about like the modest like case scenario of like Craterhoof, like you play it in like your elf ball deck or your like good green deck, and you ramp it out with like 5 creatures in play on like turn 5 or 6 or something, and you have enough damage to like kill 1.5 players.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what the numbers would be, but like not necessarily killing everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just via the number of creatures you have, right?
Yeah. You just reminded me out of nowhere. I saw like a YouTube short today from like, do you know the Card Market guys?
I think so.
I saw a YouTube short from them today where like, I don't know, just random, like a random video, and one of them made a comment like, oh yeah, Rofellos should be unbanned, and I'm just like, no, please don't do that. Because you're talking about Elf Ball. But sorry, that's besides the point. Green cards, I think a lot of people have been talking about the Great Henge.
That's why I'm thinking with this, if we're going to do this, ban the broken card advantage spells, there would be, I think, a good chunk of green cards on there that we would just have to, like, super, like...
Yeah, what's the
like,
2-mana enchantment?
Sylvan Library.
Maybe like a Sylvan Library, maybe a Great Henge, maybe like the other
Rishkar's Expertise, oftentimes,
if
you cast the 5-mana spell off of it, it's like it was like a 1-mana like draw.
Yeah,
you know, that's what it ends up
draw
like
whatever your creature size is.
So there would be a lot of green cards on there. I think
I mentioned Earthcraft before. I think besides the combo aspect, the card's just disgusting.
Saffron Olive was talking about Natural Order, maybe.
Oh, I don't like that card that much, so I could see that.
I think that would be a good contender.
Do we think like I don't necessarily know if this card's like absolutely broken for a bracket or not, but do you think like Defense of the Heart or something weird like that?
Defense of the Heart would be a pretty good one because it's pretty broken too. It's upsetting to me, the idea, and I don't know if this is the case, and I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth. It feels like maybe there was a discussion. I mean, they did put Survival of the Fittest, but not putting Worldly Tutor on there, really, it feels like there was this mindset of, well, it's just creatures. Like, creatures die to, like, every color has the way to interact with creatures.
But like you were saying, like Worldly Tutor Craterhoof, right? Like, that's just a creature, but it is a combo piece, right? Like, or not even combo piece, but like broken cards, right? Like, they can warp the game, you can get something crazy.
Yeah, like if I Worldly Tutor to get like my opposition agent or something, or like get like all these like number of unfun or like broken like the creatures do,
you know, not even like that crazy. Like, I mean, like I think it's very strong, but be like Worldly Tutor for like the red green Atali or something to play on your turn 5 with like a couple ramp spells, right? Like,
yeah, like
that seems pretty good.
Creatures just need a little respect. They're very oftentimes quite broken. Some of the best cards in Commander are creatures.
I feel like if you're putting Enlightened Tutor on there, you might as well put
we mentioned earlier, I could see Dothy Voidwalker being
for black, yeah,
because that's like just a card like we're not afraid to like play strong cards, you know, but like I feel like when we're playing, if we see a Dothy Voidwalker, we're kind of like, wow, that's it's that kind of deck now.
Ironically, I have one in a deck, and last time I played that deck, I wanted to mulligan my hand with Dothy Voidwalker because I just didn't want it to be in the game, unironically. But then I thought, you know what? I could just play it and then like crack it at the first opportunity to play a middling spell, and I can be responsible with it, right? And then I was not responsible with it. But yeah, black cards, maybe Necropotence. If we're doing the card draw thing, I know you said you were kind of opposed to doing the card draw thing.
Well, I'm not inherently opposed to it. It's
an interesting thought.
If we're gonna put that type of category of cards on there,
we gotta put a lot more.
It seems like it would only be fair to cover all of them.
Yeah.
And I think that actually might be like 10 to 20 cards.
And that might be too many.
And I don't want the list to get that. I think 40 is a really good number, and I would not like to see that swell substantially.
Yeah, we mentioned, let's see. Any white cards you would like to see on the list that aren't on the list? No, keep them away.
No, I don't think so.
Give me all my cards.
I'm, I think it says something about the state of Commander, like modern Commander, that there's more white cards on the list than green cards, you know.
As for the blue cards, it's funny because the blue has the most on it, but I still think maybe there are a couple notable inclusions.
Which I love to see.
Yeah, love to see a lot of blue cards on there. But I actually, real quick, before we talk about those, I would like to say that probably all of these cards that we're talking about were on like a list of potential game changers, and from my understanding, how they arrived at the ones they have is they tried to whittle it down as much as possible. So the cards we talked about, it's not like they didn't consider these. They obviously probably thought about all of these.
Yeah, and I'd much rather see the 40 card list than a 200 card list.
Exactly. So for blue, I think the only large, like my personal most notable thing would be Mana Drain. And I think if you want to listen, I don't want to give his exact argument, but if you want to listen to Gavin on the EDH cast, he gave a pretty okay argument for why a Mana Drain might not ruin like a two bracket 2 game, right? Like that might be okay. But I think that card's particularly egregious. I don't know what you think about that, Eli.
Yeah, I think I agree with Gavin to some degree, where it's possible somebody does the early Mana Drain into big creature and it's either not that scary or it gets removed and it's whatever. I think Mana Drain is an unfun play pattern card.
Yeah.
Which is like such a tough thing to pin down, as I think a lot of these cards, the Game Changer is a mix of like salty cards, unfun cards, and powerful cards. I think Mana Drain is like kind of all three of those categories.
Yeah.
But the unfun play pattern is you have Mana Drain in your hand, and with most counterspells, you're rewarded for being selective and smart and using them like reactively.
And on the most impactful thing.
Yeah, whereas like Mana Drain is like, say I'm playing my Kresh deck, and I'm the last person before the Mana Drain player, and I want to play my 5 mana commander.
Yeah.
That doesn't do anything on its own, like on the board state. Like at worst, it just becomes like a big creature, and they go, "Well, I've got to Mana Drain it, so I get my 5 mana."
Yeah, no Mana Drain. Like with a Mana Drain, you're incentivized to like counter the Sarah Angel, right, from like the casual deck versus like the powerful 3-drop from the good deck, right? And that's not a good. I don't think that incentivizes good gameplay.
It's like somebody plays like a Dathi Voidwalker, and you have to be like, "Well,
I gotta get more mana out of this.
Yeah, I want to get a little bit more out of that."
Yeah. So something I think is like an interesting idea is like if you play like a ritual, right? You're like let's say you're like climbing like a rock wall. You play a ritual. It's like you jumping up like jumping up a couple steps higher, right? Yeah. When you play the Mana Drain, it's like you're
gonna kick somebody down.
Yeah, you're like propelling off of someone, making them fall off the wall to get up a little bit higher.
Yeah.
So I think that's particularly egregious. I think people talk about like Mystic Remora, right? That sure, maybe that's a card considered. I know they talked about it.
That's another one that kind of fits like to me like ad nauseum, where extremely powerful card.
Yeah.
But scales with like the power
of the game,
your deck, or what type of commander you're trying to play.
Yeah.
So I also kind of respect, because like if you play it in like say 2s, right?
Mm-hmm.
It might not even draw you. Like you might have to pay like upwards of like 4 mana for your Mystic Remora to like get like a good amount of cards out of it.
And also, like let's say your bracket 2 deck, right? You play Mystic Remora like on 1 or 2 mana. Everyone plays a mana rock, right? What are you doing? You're untapping, playing your own mana rock, discarding 3 cards or 2 cards, right? Like in a high power game, maybe you're playing a bunch of 1-drops, fast mana, stuff like that, right? So, like you said, it scales with the power of your deck and the power of the game. Still
very strong though, but
yeah,
they got a lot of blue cards on there, so
yeah. Is Merchant Scrolls? That's 2 mana. Whatever. It's not important to talk about tutors that much. Force Negation, the other free counter spell that people actually play, maybe, but whatever.
Again, Gavin gave some pretty good reasons for why they decided against that one.
I think they should put Foil on the list because it's an affordable free counter spell. I'm just kidding. Because you can buy it for 1 cent.
The most common offender.
Exactly. No. So yeah, that's blue. Now I guess only multicolor, whatever. I think we can step past that without thinking too much, unless you got something for that.
Yeah, multicolor series of very strong commanders on there. I appreciate how Gavin is committed to making up for his sin as far as Yuriko, the Tiger Shadow.
Yeah.
He will never stop paying for that. And he is, the Game Changers list is, he said, also kind of like a watch list for potential bannings. So maybe one day he will find the strength to kill his child.
Well, remember, though, he also talked about, in the EDHTakes podcast, he talked about how he could see a future where they put Yuriko in like a bracket 2, like pre-con tribal deck, and it would be just fine in the 99 and everything. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, maybe, but okay, so whatever. Multicolored cards, they're great. There's really strong commanders. Maybe not. Maybe whatever. Colorless cards. Call me crazy here, think Trinisphere is kind of a weird inclusion on this. Like, doesn't that just fit into, like, the stacks category? I don't know why that's really needs to be on the list.
Well, yeah, kind of like it's a weird type of mana denial card.
Yeah.
So, it feels kind of like it should be covered. It's also like it's just like a weird stacks piece, because, like, it rounds your spell's cost up to 3, right?
Exactly,
like,
yep.
So, like...
The funny thing with that card is, if anyone's, like, confused about how it works, I think it's always just it costs 3. If you have a question, it costs 3.
Yeah. Again, it's just another card where, like, in, like, bracket 3, like, if somebody played a Trinisphere, I don't think I'd be that offended about it, right? Do you think you would? Like, do you think you'd be like, wow, I'm really oppressed right now?
No, I mean,
my mana rocks become
3
commander spheres.
Yeah, I don't. Even if, like, you're playing, like, 32 drops or 22 drops or something, like, you still play, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a weird one. Do you think that it's weird to have, like, the lands on here, like Tabernacle and Glacial Chasm? Do you think that's kind of odd, or do you think that's normal?
Tabernacle, I think, kind of fits where, like, we were talking about, like, Gaia's Cradle, where, like, obviously it's very powerful, but it's kind of priced out a little bit.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm not particularly offended by it.
Glacial Chasm's been interesting, though, because I think for a long time in the format, it's always been, like, the kind of a hot topic card to talk about. 'Cause people will be like, I gotta make sure I have my Beast Within because I need an out to Glacial Chasm, right? That's, like, a thing.
If the intent of this list is to control for the experience of medium to low power commander, I think Glacial Chasm is actually the perfect type of card on here, because it is possible that somebody builds a bracket 2 type deck, or even some, like, I've seen people with, like, and myself included probably, with bracket 3 type decks that maybe just don't have a way to, like, effectively beat a Glacial Chasm.
Yeah.
Maybe you have one card, but is that, like, say I've got one card and I'm facing down, like, some type of, like, combo deck or deck that wins without combat, and they have Glacial Chasm, you just can't beat that. Maybe most of the time.
Maybe they have the counter spell for the one card you have, you know?
So, Glacial Chasm, I think, is a
good inclusion.
Good inclusion,
okay,
in my book.
I know before we mentioned maybe the sack a creature to get mana cards, you know, the arena, the altars, as you call them, the Phyrexian altar, and maybe, like, Krark Clan Ironworks, I don't know, but, like, they're kind of combo cards. So
some people would talk about Skull Clamp as if we're doing the really efficient card draw type of cards, but again, I think I'd prefer to not see those. As good as, like, Rhystic Study is. I mean, maybe Rhystic Study is the exception because it's just so much better than the other ones.
I think Rhystic Study might be the exception, but almost because of the, like, I know it's not stacks, but, like, it's like it adds, like, the do you pay the one thing, and that does distinguish it a little bit. Like, it adds that choice and annoyance in there. Yeah. There could be a reason why you would take out, like, maybe you take off Ad Nauseam and Trouble in Pairs and leave Rhystic Study. I don't know, but yeah. So I don't any other, like, colorless cards just jumping out to you. Not really.
There's not a lot that I can think of. I think they've got a pretty tight list here.
Yeah.
Like we said, the green card list is going to be a big issue with a lot of people.
I guess one thing, actually, I just remembered. Notably, I think Gavin talked about this. Notably, they left off a couple quote-unquote fast mana pieces. They don't have the, what I think was the Metalcraft one. Is the Metalcraft one on here? No, maybe it is. But the, like the, you have to have a legendary creature, sure, right, Mox? They left off a couple of the...
Mox Opal and
Mox Amber, yeah. And I think Gavin described those as, like, those could actually be, like, reasonably fair in like a low power deck, maybe.
Sure.
But yeah, this, whatever, you know, give or take those, whatever, fine. So yeah, that, I know we went over all those bracket cards, but
a lot of information, small group of cards, but a lot to talk about those cards within the Game Changers list. I would love to hear what people have to say. What would you add to it? What would you maybe remove? Should there be certain rules about, like, what goes on there? Maybe there should be more legendary creatures. Maybe there should be fewer. I don't know. So you want to move on to our next section?
Oh, yeah.
what can we actually do to help make the bracket system function? What can we do to actually ensure that this works in practice, in reality?
Yeah, as I talked about a lot before, many people say it's not reasonable for players to read the article or, watch the other videos, stuff about that. But I personally do think we should encourage players to read the Gavin article. I think that's the bare minimum if you want to engage with the bracket system. I think you owe it to yourself and your fellow man and woman to do that. I think you should read the article. I think you should. I think you should. I think you should. I think you should.
Well, I was thinking about this, and I was imagining after they roll this out, depending on how common it is that people have even heard of this, in practice, what is it going to look like? I go to the game store, I play with strangers or randoms, and I maybe want to bring up the bracket system. I say, have you heard of the new Commander bracket system?
And they haven't read the article.
And they say, no, what is that? Or they say, oh, well, I've kind of heard about that, but I don't know what that is. What is that? If they actually sound interested in it, now it's not like I'm just going to explain the entire article to them, because that would make me look like a crazy person. And I'm not going to pull out my laminated copy of the entire article and all the game changers and the little infographic and all this stuff. I'm not going to do all that, because that looks insane. That sounds insane, and that's going to be very off-putting to this player, especially if they're a new player or a less invested player.
You're not going to hit him with your schizo rant and then get hit back with a who asked?
So realistically, I'm thinking, is the thing to do just to ask that question, kind of gauge their interest, and then try to kind of drip feed in as much of the information as you can, obviously if they start asking questions and they really seem interested, you're going to say more and more, and maybe you get to the point where you've kind of approached pretty much just reading the article. But you want to have a conversation, right? You don't just want to dump on somebody and monologue to them about all the history of commander power level scaling and the social contract and the spirit of EDH and everything involved in all this and be well, you see in this podcast, Rachel said that this deck would really be more like a 3, but it could kind of be like a 4. So
it's like a 3.7 on the list. But I do think that if you're going to start describing it to someone and you're not, like you said, you're not going to go fully in detail with everything, right? I think just even more important. I think more important than the rules for each bracket system. That is the few tutors, no infinite stuff like that, right? I think more important than that is the description of intent for each bracket tier.
Well, actually, I think with say I'm introducing this to a new player and you or I, we're actually there in person, having this conversation with somebody. Do you think in that situation, I think it might be fair to just share the graphic with them, and then at that point it's going to open up the opportunity for them to ask questions, be okay, so this deck doesn't have any game changers in it, doesn't have any of these cards, but it's pretty good, so this would be a 2, right? And then we get the opportunity to correct that in the moment, say, well, it could be, but it's possible that it's still, which is a little confusing to people. You got to give them that, right? It seems like it should be relatively simple based on the graphic, but you kind of open the opportunity to have this conversation. And so I think outside of that, the only other thing we can really do with people is there's going to be a lot of misinformation spread about this in the and there already
is, yeah.
And it's not going to stop because, like I said earlier, I think a sizable amount of the Commander community and other nerd communities will always see something like this and be oh, well, they didn't think about this, they didn't think about that. I know better. Surely I know better.
Time to break it and show them what they've done wrong.
I'm always smarter than people when I willfully misinterpret what they're saying.
Exactly.
And that's just going to be a thing that you're going to hear a lot of stuff about this at the game store, don't you figure?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I did a little bit of reading in the Commander thread of the feedback Discord server, and some of the discussions I was seeing there were very like devil's advocate with the intent to like misrepresent or like not work by the spirit of the bracket system, right? They're like, okay, but think about this. Like if I build my deck to blink Lavinia of the 10th every turn in my bracket 1 deck, that's allowed. And it's like, no, that's not what a bracket 1 deck is. It's not trying to blink a stacks piece every turn, right? That's not what you're trying to do in that tier.
Yeah, and these people, they're trying to break or like defeat the system. Like they see it as like an adversarial thing. It's like, it's me versus Gavin and the Commander format panel because I know better.
Yeah, they look at it as like the rules on a test and like, how can I get a perfect score technically that I can argue about?
Yeah, and it's like, that doesn't make you smart. That just makes you obnoxious, and you don't understand. Like I was saying, it's a social thing, and that's why they have the kind of spirit of the law versus the letter of the law for this. I think if I was to hear somebody disparaging the system based on like half true or false information, not only is it like they're misleading other people, but they're kind of doing a disservice to themselves if they actually do have valid concerns with the system, because if they bring those concerns to like Gavin, like because he's super willing to listen to this stuff, or like the Commander format panel, if they bring those arguments that have already been addressed and been acknowledged, they're not doing anything. They're not whereas like if there definitely are with the system, there are valid criticism about it. And you can bring those, and you could maybe actually affect some change with it.
They'll be considered, right? Like your criticism, if it's good criticism, would be considered. So yeah, I think I went on my rant earlier about the necessity to shame people who act like they know everything about the brackets without seemingly have read the article. I think and
not necessarily meaning like people at the game store doing that, because that's always going to be a thing that happens. I mean, we still have people in modern day spouting off about how like bad White is in Commander, or how bad Boros is, when like it's been just like drowned in resources over the last like 3 years, like because they heard it somewhere else. People are just going to repeat,
and that's fair.
But like you said, the shaming comes because oftentimes when somebody's doing that, they're not doing it because like this is necessarily, well, it's either they are the personality I described, where like they're always trying to like kind of like fight the system in this way. But I think a lot of the time it's going to be because they heard one of their favorite creators, or they saw like a big post about this, and they're like, yeah, that's a pretty good argument.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to like lay like insane moral weight on people and say like you're like a terrible, terrible person. I just mean, I think maybe if you're almost purposefully not reading it, or being maybe willfully ignorant, or like maybe negligent to a big large degree, you should feel a little bit of shame, and you should try to correct it for yourself to become more educated and not not spreading misinformation. That's all. That's my big thing here, and I'm coming on a little strong, so I guess I apologize, but I do feel that way. Yeah, so do you have any... Do you want to move on to our next topic here, or is there anything else you want to talk about that?
I think I'd like to recommend some potential sources of more information if people do have more questions about this, or if they would like to learn, because you can kind of opt in your investment level. I think number one thing we've got as far as recommended content for this, just read the article, at least like skim it, right? Like, or if you're going to have like conversations about this, or if it's something that you're going to want to talk about, maybe be willing to pull up the article. If you have questions, there's an FAQ at the bottom. You can go right to that. It's a really well organized article. It's got a lot of white space. It's got freaking pictures in it. Like, it's not going to, it maybe take 10 minutes with like good reading comprehension to fully consume that article top to bottom.
And one part, Gavin put together that really well. There's a section that I think is particularly, if you want just like the very simple version, I think near the end of the article, he has a like recap section where he's like, this is like bracket 1, 2 sentences, 3 sentences, bracket 2, 2 sentences, bracket 3, 2 sentences, something like that. I'd recommend that if you're only going to read one section of the article.
if you have more time, but you prefer like an audio format, if you don't like to read a lot of stuff, if you just want to like listen to something in the background, the shortest possible version of this would be the Good Morning Magic video that Gavin did. It's about half an hour. You can maybe skip ahead a little bit into it, and he's just going to be talking about it. I'm pretty sure he's just saying pretty much what was in the article, maybe a few extra like additions.
Yeah.
But you could probably pretty easily get most of the info just from that video. Outside of that, I think they had a larger stream the day that they did this. I haven't watched that yet. That's probably going to be a bit less consumable, probably a lot longer. If you are a big fan of the EDHTakes podcast, they had Gavin on to do an interview. They had Dana and Matt talk to Gavin about the bracket system and answer a lot of commonly asked questions. Gavin went really in depth in some stuff. I think the podcast is a little over an hour long.
Yeah,
not a super long one.
And one thing that I think is interesting about that podcast is, and also one thing I want to commend Gavin and everyone alongside him for, is that was all recorded and everything before the announcement, the full announcement of all the bracket stuff. And it was integrated into EDH Rec, sites like Scryfall, sites like Architect. They made sure, Wizards and Gavin made sure to make sure that was all ready when they announced it, so it could kind of all come together and be this community thing. So I think that's pretty cool.
And everyone who's feeling so smug, thinking like, oh, yeah, this is far from perfect. If you listen to anything with Gavin talking about this, and one thing I really respect about him from that podcast, he is the first person to acknowledge that this is, at the moment, it's far from perfect. They're still working on it. He actively is seeking criticism and feedback. And he said he's going to be listening to a lot of like different videos, podcasts, reading a lot of comments. I know that he goes on r/EDH, looks for feedback.
That's
on
dangerous.
There. Yeah. There's a different Magic subreddit I think he really should be going on, but that's a different thing. So he seems like a good guy. My biggest concern from that is that Gavin might be a little bit too receptive, and if people bully and whine a little too much, my biggest fear with the bracket system as it stands right now is they're going to significantly change it by the next time.
Yeah.
And everything we just said here will be completely useless, irrelevant. We'll have to move on. Not completely, like there's going to be some things in common.
They said, I don't think we covered this at all so far, so we'll just throw it in now. They said if they're going to unban cards, and they maybe are looking at that, they're going to unban them probably to the bracket systems. They'd go from unbanned to bracket, and cards being banned would go from being on the bracket to being banned, probably. So that's a conversation for late April if that happens, though. So we'll move on from that.
As always, Command Zone going to be a must watch, must listen to about this. Rachel Weeks and Josh Lee Kwai, I think, are two of the most insightful and invested people in the Commander community. They did a really good episode on this. Rachel had a good quote about how she thinks the worst thing that the brackets could do is remove people's critical thinking about their decks. And they went through her decks, her personal decks, and kind of assigned rankings like kind of a 1 through 4, because she doesn't do CDH anymore. Going through, like, kind of talking about it, like what decks might be higher up there, like despite game changers, or like lower, like even though maybe having like 4 game changers, maybe like a 3.
Yeah, there's nothing saying that your 4 game changer deck can't be a 3, like, ultimately, right? Yeah.
Personal enjoyment, I would like to recommend the Commander Clash podcast. If you enjoy watching Tomer be psychologically tortured for the course of an hour, I think that's always a good watch. Tomer, very positive, very pro bracket system.
Tomer is an ally of the show, I think.
We declare Tomer ally of the show. He needs help. He really needs allies. Because lately, I think on the Commander Clash podcast, Richard, he's the owner of the site. And Saffron Olive, I think he owes a lot of his success in his career to MTG Goldfish. Richard has done this thing where he's told Seth, you agree with me on the podcast, Seth, or I'm cutting you loose. You help me bully Tomer, or that's it. So they've got them, but then they've also got a Crim, I think, has been off the podcast for a few episodes. They got Phil on there. If people know Phil, Brewer's Kitchen. many people commenting on the episode pointed out it seemed as though Richard and Phil had not read the article. I re-listened to the podcast. Saffron Olive, he references and alludes to the article a few times, but still seems to have a lot of
misconceptions.
Not necessarily. Well, maybe a little bit, but also like a lot of just like skepticism about whether like Magic players can ever be trusted to like do something like this effectively.
Sure.
Towards the end of the episode, Richard, maybe I'm taking this out of context, maybe I misunderstood what he was saying, says something he makes it seem like he just like does not want to ever have a pregame conversation. He says something like, I just don't want to do that. And so I don't know how you can engage with that if you're dealing with this stuff. Tomer in that episode, and I'd recommend people listen to it, he makes a big misstep, I think, as far as like debate or argumentation, where he does the fatal flaw of kind of misstepping in his language a little bit. I understand what he means, but at one point he says, and then defends this, he's saying it's not a power level system. And while it is not the goal of the bracket system to account completely for power level, there's a clear power differentiation between the brackets.
Yeah. The brackets are intertwined with power level, I would say. But I do think, like, if you want to take what Tomer said, like, super technically, or, like, give him good faith at all, it's not solely a power level system, right? That's not all it is.
It's not solely a power level system, and mainly the intent of the bracket system is not to necessarily account for power.
Yeah.
It's to account for experience, but part of the big experience of EDH involves deck power.
Relative balance of power, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So you can't really easily divorce those things.
You can't decouple them.
But as soon as he says that and backs up that position, it turns into Richard and Seth being, what? This is clearly a power level system, dummy. Didn't you even look at the infographic? 2 beats 1, 3 beats 2, 4 beats 3, and 5 beats them all. Based on power, dumbass. At which point Tomer has to be like, no, I know it's not. It's not really about. That's not really what it's about. Because within the bracket, with like 3 to 3, like low 3, high 3, we don't care about power within the bracket. It should all work within that. It's strange to me to think. Now maybe it's because I agree with Tomer, and so maybe this isn't a fair argument. I feel like I can understand what he's trying to get at based as a listener who just even knows a little bit about him and knows the stuff from the article. I can understand what he's trying to get across. There were many people in the comments of this episode kind of ragging on Richard and Seth a little bit. And there were multiple times I saw Seth responding to people in the comments saying things along the line of, I still don't understand what Tomer meant by this. And I think if you can't, like I get it. What he's saying is, if he's going to say it's not a power level system, that's a confusing statement. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, it's easy to misunderstand that. But if you can't possibly try to understand what your longtime friend and co-host of the if you can't even, like, because Tomer's mistake, like I said, is saying that, number one, opening up the opportunity to, like, get gotcha'd by the other guys, and then digging in because he has to, because he has no allies. He's got to dig the trench. Like, he is on the defensive. Like, you can't, like, backtrack something like that, right? Like, if you do that, like, if you're like, oh no, I didn't mean that. It kind of seemed you're weak. Yeah, he can't show weakness because, Tomer, I love you, but I got to give you. And he did a better job on this podcast, but like it kind of backfired on him. Tomer, you're showing too much weakness on these things. Next time Richard does his little laugh, reframes the argument into what he wants to say, and then goes right, you need to say, shut the fuck up. That's not what I'm saying.
Based?
You are a liar. You are a debate terrorist, Richard.
Yeah, so if you're interested in enjoyment and joy, that is a recommended podcast episode. And if that's something you're interested in, I'd recommend the other, not on the same topic, but the Mana Rock debate on MTG Goldfish.
Oh my!
Watch that
Commander
one too.
Clash podcast has become, in my mind, like the number one Commander podcast, just for like sheer listenability. Like, if you like this sort of thing, if you like debate and like argument and stuff, and more so, like I said, if you like to see Tomer having a terrible time, maybe, I know we didn't want to do a lot of like visual editing, but maybe we'll post the Tomer image. I have a pretty good screenshot from that episode that I tweeted out without any context, because it sums up the feeling of these episodes.
It's like the Mana Rock episode really was like arguing with a brick wall.
Yeah.
That's funny though. But yeah, so that's the recommendations, because
check
you're not
those out.
Yeah, because you're not getting more EDHTakes videos anytime soon, so you got to find other content.
Yeah,
of course.
You got to wait until the next announcement. Then we'll have more to talk about. Well, unless there's any other videos or podcast articles you want to recommend, I'd like to introduce. We had a few years ago, we made our power level system video, and I thought at the time that was pretty good. But this whole thing has got me thinking, the overall problem with Commander power level systems or matchmaking systems, whatever we want to call these, it's not about the cards. People want to have this objective system. They want to have the ban list. They want to have the game changers list. They want to have the watch list, whatever we call it. But the problem's always going to be these bad actors. I've played a lot of games of Commander, and we talked about this, you and I, a few times. We played with some really strong decks, people playing strong cards, but their vibes were immaculate. And they're okay with things. When you respect the power level of their deck and acknowledge, oh, shit, that's powerful stuff. We got to kill that person. They're like, yeah, that's true. Go ahead and do it. No hard feelings. It kind of works, right? You can have the social correction. You can do the 3 versus 1, and they're just like, yeah, you got to get me. And maybe the more you play with that person, the more they realize that, they start thinking, I don't always mind the 3 versus 1, but maybe if my decks were a little bit weaker, we wouldn't have to do that. I'd prefer to play some games where it's not archenemy.
You get a lot of leeway if you have good vibes, like you said, Eli.
So, and when you're playing with that good actor, and they start to have that realization of like, well, people are just treating me this way in the game because of the decks I'm playing. Maybe if I played weaker cards, we could kind of like power ourselves down. And they do the reverse arms race. Mm-hmm. They're trying to build for the experience, and they're clearly taking into account the feelings of their friends and their fellow players. Now, I think the problem with regular EDH, especially among strangers, is that people are completely unconcerned with the experience and the feelings or the fun of other people. Now, when you're going to make your Krenko Goblins deck with all the fast mana and ways to play Krenko on turn 2 and make 1,000,000 Goblins by turn 3, you're just thinking, this is cool as shit. Why should I feel bad about that? The ban list didn't tell me I couldn't do this. The bracket system doesn't tell me I can't do this.
Bracket too.
Exactly. But you're not thinking how that feels for other people. And that's not always an easy thing to tell. Some people are bad actors when it comes to identifying what is fun or unfun. I think one game I killed somebody with commander damage on like turn 7 or 8 and got accused of being... they said something along the lines, I didn't know we were playing our EDH decks. And they weren't joking. We do that joke to our friends sometimes. We pull out the, oh my god, he's got a gun to our heads, or wow, pub stomper over here when we lose on like turn 12. But when people are being serious like that, it's because they're a bad actor. That or they don't know any better. But that's why I'm introducing what I like to call the blacklist system. We're no longer accounting for individual card strength or deck strength. We're accounting for the actions of the individual on here. So I'd like to introduce, perhaps in this we have some kind of maybe a social credit implementation where at the end of a game you pull out like the Magic Companion app or something. You get to give a rating to the player and write a little review about it. Now, under this system, like I said, there's going to be bad actors who will downvote or rate people inappropriately. That will be accounted for, and there will be a you're not allowed to give too many. Yeah, if you're found to consistently downvote every single person you play with, the saying goes, if you're surrounded by assholes, you might be the asshole. Mm-hmm. We will have an account for that. And there will also be, I'm thinking, perhaps at the game store, depending on how many employees they have, maybe this can be like a volunteer service where you get like F&M promos or something. Perhaps a fun Gestapo patrolling the aisles, making sure people are having a good time. If you turn over and you see people playing Commander. I think there was a couple nights ago, or a few Commander nights ago, weeks ago, where there's a particularly obnoxious person playing there now, and I looked back and saw friend of the show Clay playing with, I think, his friend Josh, and I look back and they're playing with this obnoxious, very rude person, and Josh looks red in the face. He looks mad, and Clay looks very uncomfortable. And now I never asked them what the hell happened there, but based on some of the things I had heard about this person, this individual, saying incredibly rude things and being just very unfun to be around, not necessarily because of their decks, which I think are actually pretty low power, because of their personality. Mm-hmm. Now they would be flagged. And ultimately, if you get enough bad social credit under the system, we'll have like 2 tables at the game store. They get to play with each other. Punishment fits the crime. What do you think about this system?
I think, what can I say? The only thing that works for fixing a bad social credit would have to be some sort of re-education, as they say. You know what I mean?
Yeah, perhaps we could have at like Magic Cons, they could have like a re-education like little grotto, or like they have Gavin, and like maybe they got like Jimmy and Josh come out and they explain the spirit of like maybe we have Shivam there.
You ever went to college or high school or something, and you have like a big assembly, and they have the self-help guy come and talk about things. You could be like, you could have Jimmy come up and be like, "Hey guys, how to be a good Commander player? Be fun to play with." That would go pretty hard.
Yeah, and ultimately, if you accrue enough good social credit, you get the reward of getting to play with, say, EDHTakes at the
exactly.
game store.
And maybe Wizards will mail you out some promo cards.
Yeah.
That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that'd be good, because there's got to be incentives. There's got to be rewards. There's got to be punishments.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe we could include the smell thing, if somebody's like a little too smelly,
Minus 5 social credit points.
And maybe they get the opportunity to appeal and like get like an investigation. Like maybe they can't afford deodorant. So at which point Wizards will send you some. Gavin will break the bank a little bit, and we'll fix that problem. This is going to be it's a
beta system.
The idea is to lift people up.
Exactly.
And to make the world a better place through helping each other.
Through segregation. by personality.
Yeah, because we all know that guy at the game store, right? They kind of show up. People don't really like him. People kind of don't want to play with him. But like Magic players are not a courageous lot. Nobody has the courage to say, "No, I don't want to play with you." It's rude, right?
Yeah.
But if there was a rule about it, maybe we could get something fixed. Maybe we could kind of crowdfund towards like maybe getting therapy for these people.
Yeah. Be helpful.
Have them be rehabilitated like certain other Magic personalities that we like to talk about. And they could have a redemption arc, and maybe eventually they start their own gameplay channel. They start doing YouTube shorts. They get big, they could turn things around for themselves.
Exactly.
We teach people how to treat each other.
Well, you know what? What is justice if not rehabilitative justice?
Exactly. That's what I want to have. I want to have rehabilitation. I want to fix these people.
All right. Well, I think this metaphor has gone far enough. So, what do you say we wrap up the show and just call it a day? I think this has been a pretty productive discussion. I hope if you were someone that can make it through a 2+ hour video from us about the brackets, if you want to engage with the brackets, I hope you give the article a read. That's my main takeaway. Please do that.
And please, I would actually like to know, aside from the other questions we asked throughout the video, like things about like the game changers list, the number of game changers, things that could change within the brackets. What do you guys think can actually be done to help facilitate this? What can we actually do to make this work better and ensure that it works? Because I'd love to see it work. I'm not looking to see this fail. I always kind of hope that we could actually arrive at something like this that actually helps people, unlike the old 1 to 10 system.
Yeah, honestly, when they announced the bracket concept back in September or wherever that was, I was very skeptical. Personally, I was pretty skeptical.
Yeah, their old system looked like it was not going to work very well at all.
And I was very pleasantly surprised when this came out a couple weeks ago. I'm actually fairly happy. And that's a lot coming from me, cynical Spencer here, but very happy.
My biggest problem, it's hard to tell like how much this will actually do for people. It's like it's hard to tell right now if it's actually going to achieve much. But as it stands right now, looking at like the rules they've set between brackets, the game changers list, everything about this that I can look at, and knowing that it's in the hands of Gavin makes me think I don't hate anything about this.
Yeah.
Nothing seems inherently like wrong about it.
And I think it's honestly just a pretty good job. So, yeah, this has been EDHTakes. We appreciate you.
Yeah, let us know what you guys think. If you haven't already subscribed, give us a subscribe. Please comment. I'd love to hear people's thoughts on stuff. If you disagree with anything we said, if there's anything that we didn't cover that we maybe should have, maybe we'll revisit this when they update it.
If you agree, stroke my ego.
Yeah. Give us a follow. We're still on X.com, Twitter. Maybe we have a Blue Sky account now, right?
Technically.
Yeah, we haven't really done anything on. But commenting, always a good way to get a hold of us. Give us the like, subscribe, all that stuff. And hopefully we will be back at you with another video or podcast within the month.
Yep.
So thank you guys for listening. No, it was a long one. Let us know what you think of the blacklist system too. If you'd like to see that implemented, let Gavin know about that. I'm sure he'd be very interested. But yeah, we'll see you guys soon, hopefully.